If you're feeling called to host an event, but you don't have an email list yet, this is for you. So I will tell you that the road from here is uphill, but it's doable. And so I want you to keep listening because I've got 3 things that you must consider if you're deciding to go down this road. Recently, I was on a one-on-one coaching sales call with a prospect, and they were extremely interested in hosting an event, and they didn't yet have an email list. They thought it would be an excellent place to start to drive some cash fast. And then we talked about how an event requires people, and people don't just show up without much notice to something when they haven't yet built up a little bit of that know, like, and trust with the person who's hosting the event. They definitely don't get on a plane without a little bit of that. And so we strategized a little bit on how it could work. And so I want to piggyback off of that conversation and share some of those ideas that we came up with so that if you're in that same position, you can use these ideas as well. Of course, I've always got that guide to 107 ways to fill your event for free. The guide is free. The ideas cost some money. But the guide is free. It's over at fillingevents.com. So you can always grab a copy of that, 107 ideas. But I want to talk specifically about ones that are just for someone without an email list when you're just starting. So the first question is, can you afford to buy your way? So what I mean is, if you don't have a list and you want to host an event soon, within the next 3 to 6 months, then one of your options is to buy ads and buy your way there. And so I am not up to date on exactly what it costs today to get an in-person event guest. But if I had to guess or make an estimate, give you something ballpark, what if I said it would take $200 in ad spend for each paid or free event guest? Would you be interested in spending that amount of money in order to get there? Because that plus the monthly management fee for an agency that knows what they're doing, and maybe that's in the ballpark of $3,500 a month. So you've got your ad spend plus your management fee. But it's doable. Run those ads to a webinar funnel and go teach live and make the offer to come to the event. It's absolutely doable, but it comes at a price. So you'll have to work with your ad specialist to determine what is a ballpark range for what it would cost for your niche in the time frame that you want to bring in those event leads, because obviously every time of year comes with different event ad costs. So have a conversation heart to heart with an ad strategist and see what you're up against. Maybe it's not 200, maybe it's 50, maybe it's 500. I don't know what it is for you. But if money isn't an object and you can afford to buy your way there, this is an option. And a really effective one. I've seen it work. I've seen it work to bring in more than 1,000 guests inside of 6 weeks. So no, it's possible. The second thing to consider is, if buying your way there isn't an option, do you have the connections to get your way there? And what I mean by that is, one time I had a client who did not have, she had a small email list, but it was not an engaged email list. And it wasn't going to get her to the amount of guests she wanted for her event. And buying her way there didn't feel like a viable option. And so we created a plan to leverage her connections because she was extremely well connected to a lot of people and organizations that had already congregated her right fit, perfect people for her event. And so we crafted some personal notes to send out to as many of her connections as possible, asking if they would support her by sending their people to an invite to her webinar series. And I feel like that was under 4 weeks. It was very high pressure, super tight time frame. Got her the event guests she needed and wanted for her event by leveraging her connections. So that is an option. Think about who you know, who has already congregated your perfect people and has a close enough connection to you that they are willing to send out an email or make social posts or go live with you to share the information about your event or a pre-event sales vehicle like a free webinar. And then the last thing I want you to consider is, what other resources do you have at your disposal? Maybe you don't have a community in your email list, but maybe you have a community online that's engaged, but you've never really asked them to move to your email list. Perhaps you have podcast listeners. Perhaps you have no podcast listeners, but you do have a new podcast and you can use it as business development and bring on guests who are willing to be on your podcast, who have congregated your perfect people, and you can use that podcast interview time as an opportunity to build a relationship with them and then make the ask if they would invite their people to your event or to your free thing that's going to have an offer at the end of your event. And maybe you have a social following, again, that hasn't been turned into an email list, but you could do some things to move them swiftly to your email list so that or a free event like a webinar where you can start to sell them. I hope that it gave you some perspective, this conversation that we had today, because while it's not my preference that people start their business by hosting an event, I know that people do it all the time. It is just some people's preferred medium, and I want to support you if that's your choice and desire, but also I want to make sure that you are going into it eyes wide open, knowing it will take a significant amount of effort and planning and a runway of time in order to move those guests into registered guest status from prospects. I hope that this gave you some actionable tips, some inspiration, so that you can decide what the next right action is for you. I'll tell you that after we had that conversation about the potential of working together one-on-one to help that prospect that in that recent sales call that I was on get to their event within, they wanted to have the event within 6 weeks or so. They wrote to me afterwards saying the call was so valuable and it gave them the perspective they needed to realize an event may not be the quick cash infusion they were looking for, quick, easy cash infusion they were looking for, because they don't have a list, because they don't have connections, and because they're not in a position to buy their way there. And so they decided to postpone it for 12 to 18 months and really use this time with huge amounts of intention to build up their list. And when I saw that note come in, I said, yes, like, I really applaud your decision. I support it. I'm cheering you on. We can work together when the time comes. But I love that you've decided to put in the work of doing the list building. And it takes time. It takes time. But I've given you some ideas today that if time isn't an option, you have other ways around that. You can buy your way there, leverage connections, or any of those other ideas I gave you. I hope this was helpful. If it left you with some questions, slide those into my DMs over on Instagram. And I appreciate you hanging out with me today. This was so fun. Take care.